Friends, welcome back. Now, we've got another hour left in tonight's program, and we're going to spend that with Dr. Webster Tarpley, who was just on the show last week. But, of course, we didn't get to finish everything we have had to talk with Dr. Tarpley about. Two subjects that we're going to go over. There are several very viable, well, I should say intellectually viable, of course, candidates here in these United States that Dr. Tarpley wants to let us know about, and then we're going to focus back in on the similarities, the unfortunate similarities between the current situation and the precursor to World War I. Dr. Tarpley, welcome back to INN World Report.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for inviting me.
Webster, last time we had such a fascinating discussion. We did not get to talk about these great candidates, and so I asked you to come back on the show. Why don't you remind us? We have talked about some of them already, but let's go run down the list. Go ahead.
Well, it's a nationwide movement by now, I guess we can say. It cuts across many regions, and the common denominator is the program drawn from the United Front Against Austerity. Tom, you were there at the foundation just a couple of days before Superstorm Sandy hit New York in October of 2012, right before Obama's reelection. We had the founding conference of that in New York City, and indeed you were a prominent speaker in this thing, and also then the Tax Wall Street Party, right? The difference being the United Front Against Austerity is a kind of think tank and worldwide sort of theoretical, programmatic agency. But then we've got the Tax Wall Street Party, which is a political party in the United States, actually registered, I think, at the Federal Elections Commission and in a number of states. Now, we have some people, sometimes we have people who are Tax Wall Street candidates in the Democratic Party, and we've also got then people running on a straight Tax Wall Street ticket. So why don't we start? Maybe we start in New York, since you're in New York, right?
We can, Webster, but if for 1 second, the notion of a national party we've heard these one-issue voters and so forth. How do you reconcile that? A national party whose very name is a single issue? Is it really one issue, or is this one issue so overriding that it warrants the situation?
No, there's an entire, completely detailed, articulated program, and the Tax Wall Street is the leading edge, right? There are really two sort of polar stars here. One is Tax Wall Street, 1% tax on all Wall Street turnover, stocks, bonds, derivatives, and so forth. This gets you hundreds of billions of dollars for the federal budget, and our proposal is that this be a federal tax, but then half of it going to the states as revenue sharing. And that's, of course, important. Well, trickle down is a dirty word, but revenue sharing, I think, is a good, solid term, and it's actually what it is. And it also means that with that kind of money going into the states, this holds out the prospect of some significant relief on the property tax front, right? If you have to pay property tax to pay for local schools, fire departments, libraries, police departments, and all this, the Wall Street sales tax definitely helps in that regard too. But the idea, of course, is break the power of Wall Street, first of all, the idea that they are immune to taxation. When you see people come on CNBC and say, yeah, we're out there making money and the federal government doesn't subsidize us. Well, they do, because you don't pay any sales tax. You financial parasites don't pay what any shopkeeper pays, right? Any small businessman has to pay sales tax on everything sold, but not you. So that's going to come to an end with the 1% Wall Street sales tax. So
and Webster, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's based on the despicable notion that even a tiny 1% tax will be the ruin of us all if it is applied to Wall Street.
That is their claim, right? They actually are happier to keep quiet about it, because the beauty of the Wall Street sales tax is that once this becomes an issue, it's almost impossible to refute. So once you bring it up, the Wall Street guys are already in bad shape. They're very much on the defense. Then they'll say, oh, no, you're interfering with this wonderful machine of growth and prosperity and jobs.
That's doing what for us exactly?
Yeah, right, precisely. What have you done for me lately? Right, 1950, maybe 1960, but certainly not now. So that's one side of it, right? But the impudence of these guys is amazing. And then the fact that they control part of the federal government, right? That they've arrogated to themselves powers that the Constitution ascribes to Congress have been taken out, put into the Federal Reserve System, and put under private control, Wall Street control, the New York Fed, and all of the branches, right? All those, when you take out a dollar bill, if you've seen one lately, or any kind of money, it's got a letter on it, and that corresponds to a district, San Francisco or New York or Chicago or any of the other ones, Dallas. Lots of those. But they're all privately owned, and they make policy in the Federal Open Market Committee. So the idea that we're into is deprivatize the Fed, Tom, as you've always said.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
I mean, in other contexts, you could say seize the Fed, nationalize the Fed, federalize the Fed, but deprivatize it.
I think that's your most powerful way to say it, and I hope you stick to it.
It depends on your audience, I suppose, but certainly deprivatize is the idea. And then you can do this. 100% of the Fed is deprivatized, or you can deprivatize a part of it. You can say we're opening now a credit facility, right? There's fiscal stimulus, tax policy. There's monetary stimulus, right? Printing money. This is not that. This is credit stimulus. And back in 2008, the Fed had a special credit window for AIG insurance only, for certain hedge funds only, for money market funds only, right? So they were getting a special credit stimulus window from the Federal Reserve to bail them out. So we're saying, stop with those, no more of that. Let's have a student loan window where everybody can refinance or take out student loans for 0%. That's our investment in the new generation. We're going to at least lift the burden of usury off this $1 trillion+ of student loans, and or we can avoid foreclosures by forcing the Fed to refinance individual homes and family farms. We can use it, above all, $5 trillion immediately to start rebuilding infrastructure, right? To start creating 30 million new productive jobs in the infrastructure area, and so forth, right? And then use that to provide working capital. If you're a small businessman and you have a tangible physical product, whatever it may be, you are in line for certainly loans at less than 1% from the federalized Fed. So the idea is the Federal Reserve no longer serves the banking community and to hell with the rest of the nation, but serves the public interest through broad-based economic recovery, full employment, rising standard of living, and things like education, infrastructure building, scientific research, 1,000,001 different things, and nothing that the Fed isn't doing. Recovery.
Nothing that the Fed isn't doing right now, but just for different sectors and different people.
Well, it's radically different because right now they only, in order to get anything from the Fed, you've got to be a financial parasite. You can't be a productive, positive part of the U.S. economy. In other words, the producers, right? Industrial capital has been completely vanquished by finance capital, so that the Federal Reserve serves finance capital and nothing but. So I think it's a fairly radical change, although it only involves, again, instead of having the credit stimulus window say AIG, it says Main Street or student loans.
That's what I mean. It's nothing that they're not doing doing already. It's just for a different sector that is a much, much greater benefit to the rest of the country.
Yeah, but again, who gets the money? Most people would say that's a pretty important thing. But you're right in the sense that this is all tried and true. It's all been done before. It's time tested. It's essentially a combination of the best moments of the New Deal and the best moments of the Lend-Lease program. And Lend-Lease, of course, is what put an end finally to the heavy unemployment of the Great Depression. Not World War II itself, but Lend-Lease, with the mobilization of credit power for, in that case, defense production. We would do it, of course, for all kinds of peaceful development and production like that. So the candidates are all for this, but let me get to some candidates now. Randy Credico in New York State. You may know this news. He was on his way yesterday running for governor. He's on the ballot. So it's Andrew Cuomo against Randy Credico against Zephyr Teachout. She's now on the ballot. She has fought off an accusation that she was a carpetbagger, that she really lived in Vermont. And she certainly spent a lot of time in Vermont. But the main problem with Zephyr Teachout is Soros. She is a Soros candidate, right? And between the Koch brothers on the right and the Soros machine on the left, I don't know which is worse. Soros is extremely sinister. If you're a Soros person, it means that you do believe that Wall Street speculators, because that's what he is, should run the world, right? So she was part of the board of the advisory board of the Open Society Institute, and that is Soros's foundation, right? So Soros, you want to put Soros in the executive chamber there in Albany? I think bad idea. Anyway, Credico was going up towards Westchester. He was on his way. He was at Dyckman Street, I think, way up. He was on his way to an interview yesterday, and he saw two people they turned out to be cops, plainclothes cops, but he didn't know that. What he saw was two guys beating up a black guy, two white guys beating up a black guy, I believe. So he started filming it with his cell phone, and then he was arrested. Okay?
That'll get you put in a concentration camp these days in this country, no?
He was accompanied, interestingly, by, I believe, on the scene, William Kunstler's daughter. Remember William Kunstler, the great
of course.
attorney? So
great
his
sideburns.
daughter was there, and she testified that the cops were very rough, right? They tried.
All right, right back, friends. We're out of time. We'll be right back. All right, good friends. Let's get right back to it. Dr. Webster Tarpley with us on the show tonight. We're talking about the Tax Wall Street Party. We're talking about the beginnings of a grassroots movement to get this thing turned around. Transpartisan movement, I'd like to add. Dr. Tarpley can comment on that. And we're talking about specific candidates such as Randy Credico right here in New York, who's running for governor. Webster, back to you.
So vote for Credico on September 9th and or in advance, right, if you have early voting or absentee voting. So that's the New York State Democratic primary. There is a statement from Howie Hawkins, who's the Green Party candidate for governor. He's sympathizing with this scandalous situation, right? It was these two cops arrest Credico, saying, "Hey, you're not allowed to film us." You go in public, there's no presumption of immunity to being photographed, and it also turns out that there's a complex legal situation where there are some federal appeals districts, appellate districts in the federal system where the precedent is, yes, you can take out a cell phone and film the cops at their work in public, right? In public, in the subway in this case. But New York State is not covered. I guess the second circuit is not yet, because that's the Manhattan court, right? So that's not yet on this thing. And then he was kept overnight, okay, in a holding cell. Credico describes the atmosphere in the holding cell as Dostoevskian, and they did this because they said, "Oh, we've got an old warrant against you from 2012 or something." So they're very definitely interested in harassing Credico at this point. But again, Cuomo, Zephyr Teachout. Again, Cuomo, we know, Wall Street puppet, despicable character, shut down his own anti-corruption commission. I mean, unbelievable stuff. And then Zephyr Teachout representing the Soros group of foundations. And then Credico, who represents the 1% Wall Street sales tax and the deprivatization of the Federal Reserve. So that's one. But again, the power of this thing is it's a continent-wide movement. Let's go to Nebraska. Let's go to Dan Burdorf. Before we leave Credico, let's remind you it's Credico 2014. Credico 2014. Okay? So, and remember, he ran for mayor last year, mayor of New York City, in the Democratic primary, and then all the way to November as the Tax Wall Street Party. In this case, in the case of Dan Burdorf, he is the Tax Wall Street Party. One of the reasons for that is the Democratic Party in Nebraska is a dirty word. They do have it, but it's not, it's not going to help you. So Dan he's gotten a lot of attention this week. There was a national Associated Press wire that went out. I know it was printed in newspapers in Florida and in other states. And this presents Dan as running for the United States Senate in Nebraska, November election, Tax Wall Street Party, and they stress the 1% Wall Street sales tax as his program. There's also a more lengthy article in the Lincoln, Nebraska Journal-Star News. So he's got those. And he's on his way soon, next week, I believe, to go to the cattlemen's debate, right? The cattlemen out there in far western Nebraska, right near the Colorado border, I guess. They have a candidates debate, and he's going to go up against Ben Sasse. And remember, Ben Sasse is this very strange guy who at one point was the interface of the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department. He's a Tea Party populist, an old boy.
Sounds like a fusion center on two legs.
Well, he's a high-level spook. And so Sasse is this character who supposedly he's an anti-Catholic. He belongs to a denomination of neo-Calvinism, I guess, which says that the Pope is the Antichrist, and that's going to be very interesting to people in.
Doesn't Calvinism also say if you're poor, it's your own damn fault?
And I think Ben Sasse would certainly go along with that. And remember, Sasse is the guy who was tutor and proctor to the House pages back in the 1990s when Mark Foley, you'll remember him, the Republican congressman who was molesting these children, right? These House pages. The 2006 congressional election, right, was largely determined by this guy Mark Foley and his friend Jim Colby, Kolbe, two Republicans, both of them determined to molest these pages, especially.
And this guy Ben Sasse from Nebraska was in the middle of that.
He was supposedly the proctor, in other words, the guy protecting these children from sexual predators.
He's doing a no-lay. There
then
it goes again.
On, Tom, let me just get the pattern. He moves on then to be the head of I think it's called Midland University in Nebraska. And lo and behold, on his watch, the athletic director is arrested for pimping and sexual deviations and molesting students. So that's number two. And then the other one we find is that going back to Sasse's time at Health and Human Services under Bush, he's in power in that agency at the same time that the agency successfully gets a woman thrown off the Nebraska Foster Children's Board. This was a woman who was famous and highly respected for her attempts to save young kids from being put into foster homes where they were going to be molested. And Nebraska has this history, right? This history.
A long history. The Franklin scandal, Boys Town. It's terrible. So why does this keep, it's like a bad penny. It keeps coming up over and over again, Nebraska with this stuff.
Sasse is a worthy continuation, a worthy prolongation of the Franklin scandal. So he's got pages. He's got this athletic director at his university on his watch, and then this woman being essentially, harried out of her job so that presumably more kids could be placed in abusive homes. And the machine that's supporting SAS is precisely this Nebraska Republican machine, which is heavily lauded with pedophiles. That seems to be the lesson we learned back in the
right in the middle of the country where everything's supposed to be hunky dory. Real quick, back to Randy. Back to the other candidate, the Democratic guy, Bill. I mean, this sounds like it puts the Democratic Party up there between a rock and a hard place. Of course, they want to do what they can to support any kind of Democrat, especially if it means a seat in the Senate. On the other hand, this is a relatively radical candidate. And what do you think they're going to do? They're going to buckle to the powers that be, or are they going to get behind the Democratic candidate?
Well, the Democratic candidate is another person, right? That's a guy called Domina, Domina. He's a labor lawyer. He's a Democratic Party hack, a wheelhorse. The interesting thing is, all of these candidates, the two that I've mentioned so far and the third I'm going to tell you, there's a pattern where when the Tax Wall Street Party comes to town, or the United Front Against Austerity, and starts putting out Tax Wall Street, deprivatize the Fed, these other candidates are forced to begin mimicking that. They have to ape it. It's not sincere. They're not really going to do it. But you take, Credico, I think, had some role in pulling de Blasio to the left. Zephyr Teachout, if you look at Zephyr Teachout's original webpage, she has nothing about a Wall Street sales tax. But then at the end of July, she discovered that Credico was getting traction with a Wall Street sales tax. So she comes out in favor of it. But of course, I think this is just window dressing. But in the case of Dan Berdoff in Nebraska, the Democrat, Domina, has begun to imitate his sort of rhetoric and program points as well. So if you support the Tax Wall Street Party or these Tax Wall Street Democrats, right, according to the conditions in each state, you're actually getting an immediate benefit. You're getting some bang for your buck, because you're forcing issues onto the agenda that the Republicans and the Democrats would never allow.
All right, we got a strange sound there, but we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Dr. Tarpley just after these messages.
One more candidate.
Yep. So we are Britannia, Jewel in the Crowns. Great song about the British Empire from Fairport Convention. Please check it out. Even just look up the lyrics. It's a great song. Get yourself a copy. Get an MP3 of it. But meanwhile, and speaking of MP3s, by the way, Dr. Webster Tarpley, our guest, go to tarpley.net. Every interview that Dr. Tarpley does with us is there on his program, on his website, as well as on our great archives at the Logos Radio Network. And you can download it, listen to it again if you'd like, share it with your friends. Let's get back to it, Dr. Tarpley. We're going to finish up with the third candidate out in California, of which you speak, and then we're going to go on to the conditions in the world today, similar to World War I. Go ahead.
Right. Now, California, right, the 5th Congressional District. Here we have a Tax Wall Street independent candidate, James Hinton, Hinton. Now, in California, they have this strange system, right, where they have a primary and the top two vote getters are on the ballot. So in this case, it's Mike Thompson, 10-term Democratic incumbent, is number one across the finish line. But second is James Hinton, who got 12 or 13%. And Hinton beat out another independent. There was no Republican candidate. Now, this is very important. California is the most modern state. California is the state that shows the other states their own future. And in this case, the Republican Party has pretty much disappeared, collapsed, become extinct in large areas of California, right? This is a model, I hope, for what's going to happen in the United States as a whole. And this, of course, goes back to Pete Wilson, his racism, his xenophobia, his hatred of Hispanics, and now the Republican Party is paying the price, and it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys. So in this case, though, we got Mike Thompson. Now, this gets us to a very advanced situation, because once the Republicans are gone, that's not enough. We've also got to split the Democrats into two parts. We've got to have the Wall Street Democrats. They're certainly there, right? And then the populists, the New Dealers, the labor people, the people that are people of goodwill, right, to whom the future should belong, upon whom the future depends. So that's Hinton now. He's out there providing leadership to this party reshuffle, right, which is happening. And it's not happening all at once, but it's happening. So he's going up against this Mike Thompson. Again, 10-term incumbent, Democrat. Thompson is the number 2 Democrat on the House Select Committee for Intelligence. And this Thompson, interestingly enough, is a participant in the bipartisan Benghazi cover-up. And I'm not talking about the stupid Republican demagogy about, Obama is responsible for Benghazi. No. This is Petraeus, Carter Ham, and the neocons, right? The Romney neocons. They're the ones who brought us Benghazi. Thompson, however, told the San Francisco Chronicle at the beginning of the week, he said to the San Francisco Chronicle, we in the House Select Committee on Intelligence have decided that there was no wrongdoing, no crime committed. Now, that's simply a lie. He said there's no stand down. Yes, there was, Congressman. Petraeus ordered the stand down. Petraeus told those heavily CIA paramilitaries in the Benghazi annex not to disturb the terrorists as they were killing Ambassador Stevens. Of course, Ambassador Stevens there to ship equipment and jihadis to Turkey for use then in Syria, and that then became ISIS, right? Same guys. But so there's a bipartisan cover-up of all of that, and Thompson is a key part of it. Thompson also, if you've been on the House Select Committee for Intelligence for quite a few terms, and this is the age of NSA spying, if this is the age of the Arab Spring, if this is the age of ISIS, right, trained in NATO training camps, then you got a lot to answer for, right? If you're a watchdog, you're a pretty pathetic watchdog. So Hinton will be making those points. But it's the wine country, and today at Sonoma State, right, State University of California at Sonoma, there was a joint appearance by Nancy Pelosi and Mike Thompson, and they were so happy. What this amounted to, Hinton wrote a letter to the president.
What's a 10-term guy need Nancy Pelosi for?
They're just there, right? They're cavorting and celebrating themselves. They tell each other how great they are. You know how that stuff works. So this is the decadent ruling class, right? The failed leadership of the Democratic Party, and these are the people who have to go. However, look, Sonoma State is a public institution paid for with tax money. And James Hinton sent them a letter, the president of this college, saying, wait a minute, you can't have a partisan event with Pelosi and Thompson only on public property like that. You've got to give the rest of us equal time, right? The fairness doctrine. And they didn't respond, but they're going to have to respond. This is an issue that will not go away. Just concerning the Wall Street sales tax, I want to tell this story because it's important. When Jerry Brown was getting ready to run for governor, right, to make his comeback, this is now 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago, right, because he's trying second term now this year. The United Front Against Austerity, or what would later become the United Front Against Austerity, including yours truly, we had a Puma Democrat activist. The Puma Democrat was an anti-Obama Democrat left over from 2008. A Puma Democratic activist, a rather well-known woman of great talent, I think, got into a conversation with Jerry Brown, and she said to him, "Look, you need the Wall Street sales tax because that's how you're going to get revenue without having to do regressive taxation on the poorer people, the wage earners who can't afford that stuff." So Jerry Brown said, "Okay, I'm going to ask around and see what people think." The first person that he went to,
did he go ask minimum
Tom,
wage?
I need the story.
I'm giving
Please,
you
the story.
Okay.
He went to Paul Pelosi. Paul Pelosi is the husband of Nancy Pelosi. He is a Wall Street predator. He's a speculator. He's a very powerful guy in the Fifth congressional district. He's trying to buy wineries and other properties. So Paul Pelosi, called in by Jerry Brown, and what does Paul Pelosi say? He says, oh, no, we don't want the Wall Street sales tax here in California. Let those guys in Washington do that. Let the feds do that, and then we'll benefit from it. So with that very bad advice, Jerry Brown then dropped the Wall Street sales tax. So there's a backstory here, which is very important. And as I say again, this Paul Pelosi is an important guy in the 5th Congressional District. So that's the rotten establishment that James Hinton is running against.
Yeah, and my only point was, let me guess, Jerry Brown did not ask some minimum wage person what he thought about the Wall Street sales tax. He probably went right to Wall Street to ask what the Wall Street people think about it.
In this case, the local tentacle of Wall Street, right? Because San Francisco, of course, has a very highly
like Charles Schwab. He's out there too, I think, right?
Yes, the Transamerica building and all that. So there's a big tentacle of Wall Street out there in San Francisco, and then it reaches into this wine country. So that's Hinton. Hinton today was out there at Sonoma State challenging the bankrupt leadership of Sonoma State to have the fairness doctrine, right? To open this thing up. The theme was women and families, right? Who's doing the most for women and families? And Pelosi and Thompson, of course, were there to say that they were the ones. But I think Hinton can do far better. He's talking about Medicare for all, $100 a month for everybody, or less if you're destitute or unemployed. Paid for by what? Paid for by the Wall Street sales tax. And then force the Fed to refinance $1 trillion of student loans at 0%, right? And use the Fed with financing to prevent foreclosures. And if somebody's going to be foreclosed on, refinance their home at some very low interest rate, close to zero.
And open that infrastructure window.
Absolutely. And then that's a big issue, right? Because in Canada, the big issue, to the extent there is one, in the gubernatorial campaign is Jerry Brown wants to build fast rail from Los Angeles to San Francisco. Absolutely do it. 1,000% do it. The problem is, don't get financing from...
All right, good friends, welcome back. One more segment. Well, Webster, let's get right to it. First of all, you're going to facilitate me having these three candidates on the show, correct?
Absolutely. Randy Credico, Democrat for governor of New York in the primary.
Right.
Dan Berdoff, we're still the final word from the State Board of Elections has not come, but we're very hopeful. And
who was out here in New York, by the way. We met him on I think last year when he came out for the conference.
Yeah. And James Hinton is out there in the wine country of California, just north of Berkeley and San Francisco and so forth, right? So that's for Congress, and he's an independent. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Tarpley.net, everybody. This interview and all the rest of them, as well as many, many other great, insightful articles and interviews are there. Webster, one more segment. This World War I similarity to what's going on right now. It's just incredible. Let's continue with that, and hopefully we can get to it, or you'll have to come back in a week or two.
It is. I just want to point to a theme that is now timely. I've been trying to, as we pass through these 100th anniversary moments, right, to focus on different things. If you go to Tarpley.net and listen to some of my programs, you'll hear that, in June it was Sarajevo. In July it was Germany and Austria and many other things. And now we're in September, though. Now, 100 years ago, we're in the time of the mobilization and the so-called Schlieffen Plan, right? Now, I just have to maybe start breaking the ice on this, and because this goes on now for about another 3-4 weeks approximately as a 100th anniversary. So what was going on 100 years ago now is that the German army and the French army and the British Expeditionary Force and even the Belgian army are confronting each other in Belgium and northern France. And you may remember that the German High Command had developed a plan. They were concerned about this two-front war. They had been encircled by Edward VII by having the British the French, the Russians, and indeed secretly the Italians in an alliance to box in and surround Germany and Austria-Hungary. So the German answer to that was developed by Count Schlieffen in the 1900s. And he said, well, the way to do that is we have to do essentially a blitzkrieg against France, knock them out of the war, and then turn around and deal with Russia. The idea being that the Russian mobilization, because of the huge size of the country and the weakness of the railway system and other things, would take a lot longer. So they developed this thing with the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan essentially said that you're going to go through Belgium, right? You're going to violate the neutrality of Belgium, meaning you're going to give the British a pretext to come into the war, which is exactly how they used it, right? The British were going to violate the neutrality of Belgium themselves the same day, but when Germany did it first, they were so shocked, right? They were like Claude Rains in that movie. What, violating neutrality? We would never do that.
Angels with dirty faces.
There we go. So that's Sir Edward Grey. We now have new documents, if you look on my website, new documents that George V ordered Edward Grey, as if he needed it, to get Britain into the war. Edward Grey says to him, he says, I'm not sure what I can tell the House of Commons to get Britain into the war. And the King George V, Edward VII's son, says, you have to do it. You must find a reason. And by the way, George V is not really Edward's eldest son. He's the second eldest. The eldest is this guy, Prince Albert Victor Edward, the prime suspect as Jack the Ripper. And you can find that in, take a look at my website. That's also written up there. But let's just look at the Schlieffen Plan. In order to do this, suppose you're looking at it from the German side, right? You're in Germany, you're looking across the border at Paris, right? So you have a right wing, which is close to the English Channel, and a left wing, which is close to Switzerland, okay? And the key thing with the Schlieffen Plan, based on the study of Hannibal at Cannae in the ancient world, is that the right wing has to be, you got to have unbalanced line right, as we used to say in single wing football, right? So the right wing has got to be 7 times stronger than the left wing. Imagine this. And you got to go all the way to the right. In other words, he says the last man should have his cuffs in the English Channel. So go way north, and then you swing back around Paris. So he says you're going to cross the Seine between Paris and the English Channel. So you're going to go way around, and you're going to end up with at least one army at the west of Paris. Now, to carry this out, this took guts, because the French were going to attack Alsace-Lorraine, right? Sort of on the German left. And that area was going to be left weak. And it was supposed to be weak because the idea was to get the French to advance as far as possible into Germany.
Draw them in.
Sorry?
I said draw them in.
Draw them in, yes. But get them so far into Germany they'll never get out. Because they, of course, had the mania of Alsace-Lorraine. But a lot of people would squawk about that, right? The people who, if the French reached the Rhine, crossed the Rhine, a lot of people would freak out. He also had to deal with the fact that there were oligarchs and princes commanding some German armies on the left wing who said, that's not enough for us. We want glory. We want to be able to attack. We don't want to just have a defensive battle, even if we win the war. We've got to have immediate glory, right? We've got to attack the French and drive them back.
We got to get that scar on our face under the monocle.
Something like that. Especially the Prince of Bavaria wanted this. And there's also the problem of all those East Elbian landowners, right? Those Junker, as they're called, the Junkers, out there in the east part of Germany, right? The Russians are going to come across the border and take our estates. You've got to defend our estates. What they have to understand is that this was a desperate situation. Germany was encircled, and this was the only way to do it. And therefore, you had to hang tough. You had to say, you damn commanders there on the German left wing, you're not going to get any glory. We're just going to win the war. That'll be glory enough for all of us. And you landowners out there, you're afraid of the Russians. You hang tough. Show us what you're made of. So that was Schlieffen. Now, the problem is that he was replaced by this guy Moltke, Moltke. And Moltke was the nephew of a very famous general, also named Moltke. This military right-hand man in the 1860s and 1870s was Moltke the Elder. Okay? Moltke the Elder. He defeated Austria. He defeated Denmark in 1864, Austria 1866, and France in 1871, right? He knocked out Napoleon III, right? Leading to the Paris Commune, right? That kind of stuff. So the younger Moltke, and here's the problem now, that the younger Moltke did not have the strength of character, the courage.
Intestinal fortitude.
Yeah, exactly. There are many words for it. Machiavelli would say virtu. Clausewitz would say Entschlossenheit, right? Decisiveness. He didn't have it. And what he did then was...
Fire in the belly.
He said, okay, guys on the left wing, you can get some glory too. You can attack the French way too soon. You can even go and attack the French fortifications down there, right? That part of the line, the French had these fortifications. This was hopeless to attack. And when they did, they lost. And what that meant was that because of this stupidity on the German left wing, the French were able to pull forces out of there when they got in big trouble and send them to Paris and create a whole new army that was then important for the defense of Paris in early September. And the other thing that Moltke did was he sent a couple of corps to the east, and the irony was that these two or three corps that he sent had been taken away from the right wing that was therefore weakened, and by the time they got to East Prussia, the decisive battle there had already happened. Hindenburg and Ludendorff had defeated the Russians in this famous battle of Tannenberg, which is, again, later on this month, right? Later on in August. But here's the thing. Why was Moltke weak? And then later on we can apply this to the, maybe in coming weeks, we can apply this to the question of the Battle of the Marne.
Don't tell me he was a British agent.
Well, here's what he was. He was an occultist. He was a spiritist. He believed that he could communicate with the souls of the dead. His wife, in particular, believed this. And his wife, Countess Moltke, was devoted to various forms of theosophy and indeed anthroposophy, right? So the doctrines of Annie Besant, Madame Blavatsky, and Rudolf Steiner.
Madame Blavatsky.
This is fairly well established. And here's the thing. At the height of the battle, his wife, as the German armies are getting close to Paris, and they're getting close to the moment of truth, about the end of August, beginning of September, right, 100 years ago now, he gets a call from his wife, Countess Moltke, and she says, "Oh, darling, guess what? I was just talking to my friend Lisbeth Zeidler." Lisbeth Zeidler was a medium. You know, today when you say the media, you don't mean people who can talk to the other world. But in those days, a medium meant a clairvoyant or somebody who could talk to the departed souls. And Lisbeth Zeidler claimed that she was able to do this.
And so what did she say? We only have 30 seconds. Quick.
What's the news from the other world? And Countess Moltke says, the news from the other world is you're going to be defeated. We have this on the highest authority from beyond the grave. And this, of course, this was part of the nervous breakdown that Moltke had at the key moments of the Battle of the Marne. And we'll talk about that the next time, I guess.
Very good, and that'll be within a week or two. Thank you very much, Dr. Tarpley, for coming on the show. Tarpley.net, everybody. Have a great weekend. We will be back with you with another great show on Tuesday night. And meanwhile, there's great programming here